This is the discussion about what we do with our MSW, and it's on page 447 in your textbook. Basically, we do two things with our garbage. The number one thing that we do is bury it. That's called a landfill. In fact, the official term for that is sanitary landfill. And in a sanitary landfill, you're not allowed to just dig a hole and say, bring me your garbage, which used to be the case, 50 years ago. You could buy a piece of land, dig a hole, and start charging people for their refuse. Well, that's not the case anymore because we've had so many damaging results from landfills that were not operated properly. The second thing that we do with our waste is we burn it. But first, let's cover how we bury it. It's called a sanitary landfill. And there are key parts to a sanitary landfill that you're going to have to memorize. There's a nice diagram in your book, and I'm going to show you that diagram here momentarily so that we can see exactly how they're operated. The first word that you need that might be new to you, I think we've covered this in another chapter, but just in case we haven't, it's called leachate. Leachate is the nasty, liquidy stuff that happens when garbage breaks down. Imagine a landfill. It starts as a hole in the ground, and every day the garbage trucks come, they drop their refuse. There are special chopper machines that grind down the garbage and pat it down and crush it down to try to make as much space as possible so they can fit as much garbage as possible in that hole. But eventually that hole is full. And then when the hole is full, they start to build up above the hole. And so that's why you end up with a little mini mountain that stands up above ground level. Just think about our own landfill at Rosemary Hill. That is a big hill now that's filled with garbage. So let's talk about how that works. This leachate, and the best way I can describe leachate to you is, have you ever had like some vegetables or something in a plastic bag that you were saving in your refrigerator, but you didn't get around to it, and you went into the vegetable bin, opened it up, and you found this nasty sort of brown liquid? Well, that's what leachate is. Leachate is the liquidy material that ends up whenever things go bad, when things break down. A lot of breakdown is happening in a landfill. That's a good thing. That's what's supposed to happen. For instance, one of the things that landfills do to ensure that that happens is to put a layer of dirt down each day. Just a thin layer of dirt at the end of each collection day. And the idea there is that dirt has bacteria in it, and you keep introducing microorganisms every single day so that that breakdown, that decomposition in the landfill can continue to happen. Well, because of this leachate, this nasty brown liquidy stuff that comes out as a result of decomposition, we've got to collect it. And the reason we've got to collect it is because if we don't, it will leach. That's where we get the word. It will leach down into the soil. And if you have an aquifer, it will end up leaching down through the aquifer and into the groundwater, contaminating it. So a modern landfill has a piping system. These are big PVC pipes with holes in them. And it allows this leachate, this liquidy material, to drip, drip, drip into these pipes. And then these pipes are all connected to a pump, and we can pump this leachate out. Of course, we have to do something with that leachate. We can't just pump it out and throw it in the river somewhere or throw it in the ocean. So we're going to have to take that leachate, collect it, and then we're going to have to take it to some sort of water treatment so it can be cleaned up. Another feature of a modern sanitary landfill is monitoring wells. This is key. This is a very important thing because we have to make sure that the groundwater right around the landfill isn't being contaminated. So we have the leachate collection system, but we have to check the system and make sure it's working. And that's where monitoring wells come in. We have to remember that anytime you decompose anything, greenhouse gases are emitted, especially methane. And that's why you will find at every modern sanitary landfill pipes coming up out of the ground, and that is to vent off the methane. Both of these things are bad greenhouse gases. So we've got to do something with them. One of the things that's done is to use this methane to make some sort of electricity. That's called cogeneration. The other thing about a sanitary landfill is you want it to be far away from where the people are, but not too far. It's got to be near where the waste is produced. Anyway, we cannot have the landfill too far away. So it needs to be where the waste is produced, because think of the waste in terms of the gasoline that's required for these trucks to drive all of those distances far away. Not a good idea. So it needs to be near, but not too near, where the waste is produced. So these are all characteristics of a modern sanitary landfill. Let's take a look at what one of those looks like. It starts by digging a hole. And you notice that when we dig this hole, there are some characteristics of that hole. There's a sand liner. There's a clay liner. These are required by law, all right? And the reason that they're required is so that the leachate doesn't get out and maybe down into groundwater somewhere. So we've got these liners in place. That's our first line of defense. You'll notice also, here's those special compacting machines I was talking about. I've got a video of them to show you in class. They have big studded tires, and they just drive up and down the garbage dump all day long, mashing it down so that there'll be more room for it. And of course, then they put their layer of dirt down. So this solid waste builds up inside of the hole that was built, and sometimes it takes a long time to fill that hole, sometimes not so much. You know, Rosemary Hill is supposed to still be in operation today. Their hole filled up way quicker than they expected. And Rosemary Hill is not an operating landfill anymore. You've got these pipes down here. This is the leachate collection system. Very important, because it pumps all of that nasty, liquidy stuff, and it gets it back up to ground level so that we can do something with it. Step 4. Once the landfill is filled, and then even, you know, the garbage kind of humps over and makes a hill out of it. Once that's all filled, and this takes years generally, the landfill is then capped, covered with soil, and planted with vegetation. The idea is it's supposed to be so nice you don't even know it was ever there. That's the environmental approach to modern sanitary landfill. Here are the other things. The methane I mentioned, it's produced down here in the ground. That methane needs to be vented or extracted. At Rosemary Hill, they just vent it. They don't burn it off. It just contributes to the greenhouse gas problem. But in other places, they will light it on fire and burn it up above the ground. And so sometimes you will see a flame coming out of a pipe at a landfill, and that's what the methane is. But we also have this opportunity for cogeneration. And we can take this methane, we can accumulate it, compact it, compress it is the right word. We can compress this methane and put it in tanks, and then we can use that compressed methane to boil the water to make the steam that turns a turbine. That's called cogeneration. It's a great idea. The electricity that comes from this methane isn't a whole lot. I mean, you can imagine the amount of methane that's coming out of these pipes is not a giant amount at each individual landfill. So you have to compress that and burn it for electricity. There might be enough electricity to run the landfill itself, maybe to contribute to a town nearby, but that's about it. The point is, though, instead of just letting that methane go up into space, as I just mentioned, we can capture that methane and use it for something worthwhile. The last thing to point out to you is the groundwater monitoring well. So right next to every landfill, we've got a well, a pipe drilled down into the groundwater so that we can, and they test that water every single day. Test it for all sorts of different things, but they're testing it to make sure that these liners aren't leaking, that this leachate system isn't leaking. This, my friends, is a modern sanitary landfill. Here's the pros and cons. You probably can think of them all by yourself. Sanitary landfills take up some space. They do. But they can be built quickly. All you have to do really is fence it off, dig the hole, and put the liners in and the piping. There's not a whole lot of smell involved with this. There's not a lot of open burning like there will be when I talk about the next thing. But there are also negatives. There is the risk of groundwater contamination. You do have all of the trash in one location, so there is a release of methane and carbon dioxide. And don't forget something else, guys, about your garbage. Nobody monitors what you throw out. The garbage men do not go through there and say, oh, you can't throw these batteries out. So consequently, anything that's in your trash ends up in the landfill. We don't monitor that, so lots of very, very dangerous chemicals can end up being in the landfill. Toxic gases, VOCs, you get the idea. The natural decomposition of the waste takes a long time. So that's a negative. And eventually, we're worried that even a modern sanitary landfill is going to have its problem with leaks because that liner isn't going to last forever. But that garbage is going to be in there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And these pictures I have here are of a world-famous landfill that they turned into a park where children play. And it's called Mount Trashmore. Anybody ever heard of it? It's in Portsmouth, Virginia, where the Navy has a big base in Norfolk. And here's an overhead picture of the landfill. They've built all sorts of pavilions. They've got running areas. They've got parking for cars for people to visit. Here's the kiddies' little play area. So they've taken their sanitary landfill, covered it up, put nice greenery all around it, and they've turned it into a park. Mount Trashmore is what it's called. I have a video to show you in class all about Mount Trashmore. The second thing that we do with our waste, instead of burying it in the ground, is to burn it. And this is called mass burn incineration. And when I lived in Maryland, I've told you the story before, when I transferred from Guam to Maryland, that house that I bought and lived in for 5 years was about 2 miles away from an incinerator. It was very useful for us. I mean, you could take anything down to that place and put it in the trough, and it would be on conveyor belts, and that trough would just take the garbage, whatever the people that drove by put in there, and it would go into this great big building. Looks like a power plant, it's so large, but it's just one big giant oven, and it's designed to burn the garbage. Now, there are rules and regulations about what's allowed to come out of the smokestack, but you have to remember something. Just like I told you a minute ago, because we do not regulate what you're allowed to have in your garbage, anything could be in there. And there are things that can be in that garbage that are highly polluting. That would be a very, very bad thing. So no matter what happens at the incinerator, some unintended chemicals, some things that should not be burned, probably end up getting burned and get through the smokestack without us being able to control what comes out. So there is guaranteed air pollution associated with an incinerator. There are explosions. You have to think about how massive this oven has to be, and you have to think about the solid steel encasement that oven has to have, because you don't know what people put in their trash. Somebody could throw a box of bullets in the garbage, and when it ends up in the incinerator, that heat is going to ignite those bullets and they're going to be shooting off. I mean, I'm using I'm using a ridiculous example, but you get my point. There are things that are in people's garbage that aren't designed to be burned. Yet there are some advantages to burning our waste. By the way, this is not widely done. Most places don't like to burn because of these negatives. It's very, very expensive to build an incinerator. There's lots of air pollution associated with it, especially these things called dioxins, which we will learn about in the next chapter. It's one of the dirty dozen, some of the worst toxic chemicals that are in our environment. The ash that's left behind has to be dealt with as if it's toxic, even if it isn't, because you never know what people throw out. So this saves space. Less need for landfills. Landfills take up a lot of land. Habitat destruction. When you build this building one time, you're done with having to commit any more space to dealing with the garbage. But you do have to deal with the ash. And so all of the ash that comes out of an incinerator has to be treated like it's toxic. And so there are special handling rules and regulations about it. And it has to be stored in a hazardous waste facility. It cannot be just dealt with in an ordinary fashion. Still, think about how much trash can be incinerated in one of these machines or one of these buildings instead of taking up space in a landfill. The other negative that gets talked about is because all of your garbage becomes out of sight, out of mind, you start thinking, well, I can create as much garbage as I want. I don't have to worry about being environmentally friendly. I don't have to worry about habitat destruction. I don't have to worry about filling up this landfill and having to dig a hole and have another landfill somewhere else. The incinerator will take care of all of that. And that's why this disadvantage is listed here. It actually encourages people to create more waste. And remember, one of our first tenets about decreasing MSW is produce less in the first place. When you have an incinerator, there's really no incentive because there's no eyesore. There's just a building that looks like a power plant. Now there are moves. The older incinerators don't have this. For instance, the one that was near where I live didn't have one. But there are initiatives now to understand that, you know what we ought to do? We are burning garbage. Why don't we take that energy to boil the water to make the steam to turn a turbine? And so modern incinerators are built with a power plant next door. And that should make sense to you. So that's a so-called waste to energy option. Waste to energy. We're taking our waste, our garbage, and we're turning it into energy. We're turning it into something that we can use to make electricity. Back when a lot of these incinerators were built, energy wasn't a big issue. We didn't know about climate change yet, so we weren't concerned about greenhouse gases. We weren't concerned about the coal we were burning for electricity. So a lot of the older incinerators don't have a waste to energy facility, but the modern ones do. Okay, I think that is it for incineration. Here is an incinerator, just to give you an idea. A very, very big operation. And you can tell, as I said, this incineration chamber is big, and it's got to be metal, steel encased, because you never know what's going to explode in the chamber. But it's a pretty efficient operation. We have baghouse filters to keep the particulate matter from coming out of the chimney, but we don't know what some of the other chemicals are going to be because we don't know what's in the garbage. Anything can be in that garbage. All right, I think that's about it for the two different things we do with our MSW. We either bury it in a landfill or we burn it in an incinerator. We probably have 2 more videos for this chapter, and it deals with hazardous waste. Hazardous waste management is a big topic in ACE and AP exams, especially AP. And there are laws that you're going to have to memorize that are part of this section as well. So, I will stop this one and see you in class next time.